The chamber of the Galactic Senate shimmered with tension beneath the crystal dome of Verelion Prime. Billions of beings watched from across the galaxy, their eyes locked on the centerpiece of the vast amphitheater, a pedestal of silver and starlight upon which the puzzle of the first one sat, dormant and enigmatic. It had been there since before the Senate itself had formed, long before the oldest empires had risen from their primordial planets. No one had ever solved it. No one had even made it respond. That morning, 1,000 prodigies had attempted and failed, as expected. Heirs of ancient dynasties, cybernetic minds sharpened over centuries, neural-linked collectives from thought-hive races, all had stood before the relic and left in quiet disgrace. Now, as the final applicant stepped forward, a ripple of laughter swept through the spectators. It was a child, a small, frail girl in an old-fashioned blue dress, no taller than a Trelax knee. She looked no older than 10 in human years, with wild brown curls and a pair of wide, curious eyes that took in the world like it was a riddle she'd already halfway solved. Ambassador Kepler, humanity's representative and a largely overlooked presence in Senate politics, walked beside her with quiet dignity. "This is my daughter, Ellie," he said, as if that explained anything. "She'd like to try the puzzle." A Greshel senator barked with laughter, its voice like stone grinding on metal. "Try the puzzle? This is not a toy for primitives." The presiding voice of the Senate, a crystalline entity composed of orbiting shards, hesitated. "This is unprecedented. The human species is still in its trial phase within the Senate, allowing a non-credentialed minor access to the relic. It won't react anyway." Another muttered, "Let the child play." A Zellari ambassador sneered, "It will be amusing." Permission was granted, if only out of condescension. Ellie stepped forward without hesitation. She wasn't nervous, not really. She dreamed of this moment for months, dreams full of colors that didn't exist and music without instruments. She placed her hand on the surface. The change was immediate. A golden pulse, soft and harmonic, spread from the point of contact. The artifact shivered with life. Symbols etched into its surface, long thought decorative, realigned into complex fractals. A deep chime echoed through the hall, not from sound, but from memory itself, each being hearing something different, something ancient and personal. The laughter stopped. Ellie tilted her head and smiled. "It sings," she whispered. Chaos broke out around her. Security drones armed themselves. Analysts scrambled to record the shift. High-ranking senators sent encrypted messages back to their homeworlds. The presiding voice ordered emergency containment protocols. But Ellie didn't flinch. She traced her finger along the glyphs, not like she was solving a puzzle, but like she was drawing a picture she'd already seen. Her hum, soft and off-key, seemed to guide the glowing patterns like a conductor with an invisible orchestra. In the human delegation's balcony, Ambassador Kepler remained seated, hands folded. A Zarkskiff envoy turned toward him, mandibles twitching in disbelief. "Explain this," it demanded. "What is she doing?" Kepler looked calm. Tired, perhaps, but calm. Listening. To what? To what none of you ever tried to hear. The Senate chamber was built for spectacle, for power and intimidation. But in that moment, it had become a temple. The lights dimmed as the puzzle grew brighter. From its center, a sphere unfolded, revealing layered star maps, shifting constellations, reorienting to unknown coordinates. Gasps erupted as entire systems were realigned in real time, worlds thought destroyed, gateways once lost. The map revealed a path through history itself, breadcrumbs from the first ones left only for someone who understood their design language, and a human child had just started decoding it. Technicians and historians panicked. Interpreters failed to analyze the movements. Entire civilizations had spent thousands of years worshipping the puzzle as divine. That a young mammal from a backwater spiral arm was reconfiguring it without formal training was not just humiliating, It was dangerous. "This must be sabotage," snarled the Grand Vizier of the Rilk. "It's a trick." "No," said an old Vryn scholar. "It's resonance. Emotional resonance. The artifact responds to emotion, not logic. Not computation, emotion." Senators turned toward humanities section with new eyes, no longer dismissive, but wary. Emotional beings were seen as unstable. That was the common consensus. Too passionate, too volatile, too human. But now, perhaps that volatility was exactly what the first ones intended. Not a flaw, but a key. Ellie stepped back, breathing slowly. The puzzle dimmed slightly, as if resting. Her fingers glowed faintly with residual light. She looked up. At the crowd, beaming. "Your puzzle is really sad," she said simply. "Like it's been waiting for someone to talk to." There was silence, deep and soul-cutting. Somewhere in the distance, a long-dormant satellite activated. Across the galaxy, a buried artifact on a dead world turned toward Earth. Lights flickered beneath the oceans of Jupiter's moon. The puzzle had spoken, and the galaxy began to understand that humanity, messy, emotional, unpredictable humanity, might be something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. They had assumed humans were just another species. They were wrong. Asterisk. The Senate chambers remained closed for 72 cycles following the activation of the puzzle. No races were allowed to leave, no signals allowed to transmit beyond approved diplomatic channels. The Council of Preservation demanded immediate analysis. The Dominion of Velar called for the artifact's seizure. Across the galaxy, empires held their breath as the impossible began to sink in, and Earth said nothing. Ellie returned to the human delegation's quarters under heavy guard. Not for her protection, but for the galaxy's. She was calm, happy. Even, she ate strawberry paste from a pouch while drawing in a notebook, a mess of curved lines and bright color splashes. When a Zelari observer asked what the scribbles meant, she shrugged. "It's a dream I had. I think it's important, but I'm not sure why yet." The Senate was in uproar. Emergency briefings were held every hour. Ancient species with memory recording organs reviewed every account of precursor tech activation. In known history, and none matched what the human child had done. Dozens of high councils demanded access to the girl, citing precedent and safety. The humans, surprisingly, denied all requests. "We will cooperate," Ambassador Kepler said, "but our terms must be respected. You asked us to join your Senate. You invited us into your systems. Now we ask for a measure of trust." "Trust?" the Velar delegate sneered. "You bring a child who speaks to extinction-tier technology and claim coincidence." "No coincidence," Kepler replied evenly. "Just a different kind of intelligence." Behind the diplomatic arguments, darker moves were already underway. The Creel Intelligence Network deployed psychic infiltrators to probe Earth's embassy. They returned blank, their minds scrubbed clean of even their own names. A Sithari skirmish fleet, operating without Senate knowledge, positioned itself near Sol's outer periphery, only to vanish. Not destroyed, gone. All telemetry ceased. Not even debris remained. The message was becoming clear. Humanity wasn't reacting with fear. It wasn't blustering or threatening war. It was simply watching, waiting, calculating. And that was far more terrifying. In the subcouncil chambers, alien biologists pored over Earth's neurological maps. What they found confused them. The human brain was a chaotic mess. Emotion, memory, sensory data, all tangled in feedback loops. Their minds were inefficient, cluttered, unpredictable. But beneath that, a strange pattern emerged. Humans adapted to contradiction. Most species pruned conflicting thoughts. To the Zelari, internal contradiction was a flaw. To the Creel, emotion was isolated and processed by artificial dampeners. To the humans, contradiction was inspiration. They wrote music while grieving, laughed at funerals, imagined entire galaxies of fiction for fun. They held two opposing truths and still functioned, sometimes better because of it, and perhaps that was the key. Emotion, creativity, dreams, traits no other race had mastered, because no other race had seen them as strengths. The puzzle had. 3 days after the activation, the artifact stirred again, on its own. This time no one touched it. A column of light rose from its center, displaying a rotating map of interstellar space with markings that shifted every few seconds. A code, perhaps. A warning. Or an invitation. Ellie sat cross-legged beneath it, eyes following each change with the same dreamy focus she gave her coloring book. After several minutes, she smiled. "It's like a song," she said softly, "but written with stars instead of notes." The lights shifted to match her voice. Another Senate emergency alert was declared. In the Greshel war chambers, generals argued over the threat rating of Earth. "Level 9, one barked. "They barely have full galactic infrastructure. They've activated 3 precursor failsafes in as many days," another replied. "That's more than we've done in 3,000 years. Meanwhile, Earth's public broadcasts remained cheerful and diplomatic. Humanity proposed a joint research initiative. It shared recordings of Ellie's observations. They even offered a music sample from Earth's archives, a centuries-old composition by someone named Batch when played in the Senate's analysis chamber. The puzzle shifted again. 3 glyphs aligned perfectly, a sequence thought unsolvable for millennia. Panic spread like wildfire. "It's not their technology," whispered an elder Vryn with glowing neural bands. "It's their way of thinking, their madness. That's what the first one's built for." Elsewhere, alien observers noticed more anomalies. Human ships, previously written off as crude, began showing unpredictable movement patterns, difficult to track by AI. Their military formations were tight and symmetrical, but scattered, erratic, yet devastatingly effective in simulations. One Zellari officer described it best. "They don't think like warriors. They think like predators pretending to be prey." The turning point came when a team of Rithari scholars attempted to mimic Ellie's interaction with the puzzle by forcing emotional resonance through synthetic proxies. One of their machines self-immolated. The puzzle darkened. It would not respond to mimicry. That evening, Ellie had another dream. She told her father about it over dinner. There was a doorway in the stars. But it wasn't locked. It just didn't know how to be opened yet. Kepler didn't answer. He simply handed her a pencil. She drew again. Another mess of stars. And arcs and impossible geometries. 3 hours later, scientists realized the shapes in her drawing matched the orbital patterns of a system lost since the second collapse. The galaxy was beginning to understand something it wasn't prepared for. This wasn't about technology, it was about imagination, and they were up against a species that had evolved not just to survive, but to dream in ways that no other race could comprehend. The assumptions they had about humans, primitive, reckless, emotional, were not weaknesses. They were the beginning of something far more dangerous. And for the first time in centuries, the Galactic Senate was afraid. The Creel envoy's voice quivered as it echoed through the chamber, the translation drone struggling to convey the fear behind its words. "They've cracked the vault of silence." Not opened, cracked. A star chart found buried in Ellie's drawing had led to a dead system, long thought destroyed during the galactic collapse. But when a survey drone arrived, it found something impossible, a Dyson fragment, half shattered, but active, orbiting a black sun. More impossible still, it responded to a low-band frequency Ellie had hummed in her sleep 3 nights earlier. The Vault of Silence, a legend among the old empires, had been a tune sealed by the first ones. It had resisted every mathematical approach, and a human child had opened it using a melody. Shock rippled across the galaxy. The once patronizing debates turned to emergency war briefings. The Velar declared full readiness. The Zelari offered their fleet to protect Earth from outside interference. The Sithari proposed an immediate security lockdown of all First One relics. But it was too late. The humans weren't stumbling into ancient secrets by accident. They were unlocking them, deliberately in secret halls beneath Earth's moon. A council met in silence. Ambassador Kepler stood beside General Thorne of Earth Defense Command, while a panel of off-world human strategists watched the data pour. In Ellie's drawings, puzzle shifts, resonance patterns. Her predictions matched coordinates no other species had ever deciphered. Worse still, she had begun describing structures that hadn't yet been uncovered, but inevitably would. Thorne frowned at the holographic model of the vault. She's 5 steps ahead of us. Minimum. She doesn't know how she knows. Kepler said, but the puzzle, it talks to her. In her dreams, her instincts, we trained her to listen. You trained a child to interface with extinction-level tech? No, we raised her with stories, songs, imagination. She doesn't decode it. She feels it. Thorne looked at him sideways. And the rest of the galaxy? They're still trying to brute force the universe with calculus. Ellie dances with it. Meanwhile, in orbit around the vault, the survey team vanished. Not destroyed. Erased, as if they had never existed. When the next wave of scouts arrived, they found a single word burned into the hull of their command ship, written in an ancient precursor dialect, humanity. That was the moment the Galactic Senate realized something terrifying. The first ones knew about humans. Ellie was escorted back to the puzzle by demand of the Senate. Not out of curiosity anymore, but necessity. If she was the only one who could interface with the artifact, they needed her. And Earth knew it. The chamber was filled with armed guards now. A protective field surrounded the child, and every move was recorded by 12 languages and 36 war councils. Ellie, as usual, seemed completely unfazed. She approached the artifact and pressed her palm to the side again. This time, the chamber shuddered. The glyphs unfolded like petals blooming in slow motion. From within the puzzle, a projection burst forth, not light, but memory. It showed the first ones, towering beings of molten crystal and quantum shadow, walking among younger species. And then it showed the fall, not from war, not from failure, from stagnation. The first ones hadn't perished. They had withered. They built a final failsafe, an inheritance designed not for the strongest, nor the wisest, but for the most imaginative. Not for the coldly logical, but for the ones who could adapt, dream, evolve. And they left the puzzle not as a test of knowledge, but as a signal to those who saw the universe not as a machine, but as a story. The image froze out of figure, humanoid. In shape, with bright, laughing eyes, the resemblance to Ellie was unmistakable. Panic spread like wildfire. Senate delegates began shouting, demanding control, threatening sanctions. The Velar accused Earth of fabricating the entire projection. The Creel called for emergency censure. The presiding voice floated motionless, analyzing every shift in the glyphs. But even its vast crystalline mind could not deny the symbols the artifact had chosen. Ellie simply turned to the gathered delegates and smiled faintly. It likes us, she said, because we're not done growing. On a hidden channel, deep in Earth's encrypted diplomatic net, General Thorne sent the signal. Project Lighthouse, humanity's shadow program, activated. Moments later, every known precursor ruin in human space lit up. Not with weaponry, with interface points. Human scientists had been working on precursor sites since first contact. Quietly, carefully, they had studied Ellie's responses, matched her drawings to artifact resonance patterns, and built devices to translate those into action. Now, all of it was online. While the galaxy debated, humanity had been building. The aliens had assumed humans were behind, that they were playing catch-up. They were wrong. Humanity had already passed the gate. They just hadn't told anyone. And now every major empire saw the truth. The puzzle wasn't a singular event. It was a trigger, and the galaxy had pulled it. The presiding voice finally spoke. You have awakened a convergence that predates our stars. This cannot be undone. Are you prepared to accept the consequences? Kepler didn't flinch. We already have. The lights dimmed again. A final glyph flared into view. It read, Awaken. The dreamers. In chaos they will build the path. And for the first time, the aliens realized something they couldn't unsee. They had not discovered. Humanity. Humanity had been waiting. And now the wait was over. The first fleet arrived over Earth 3 days after the glyph appeared. The Velar, backed by the Rilke and the Zellari, deployed what they called a containment force, a flotilla of dreadnoughts, data siphons and containment rings, capable of encasing entire planetary systems. Officially, it was a defensive maneuver to prevent premature technological destabilization. Unofficially, it was an act of panic, fear wrapped in protocol. Earth had gone from curious newcomer to existential question mark in a week, and the galaxy's oldest empires did what they always did when scared. They moved to control. They never got the chance. Before the first ship reached the edge of Luna's shadow, it vanished from every long-range scanner. No explosion, no trace energy, no distress beacon. Just gone. Onboard systems from neighboring ships recorded exactly 3 frames before the signal cut. A sphere of light engulfing the Lid dreadnought, distorting space like a gravity lens. Within the light, a symbol blinked for an instant. The same glyph Ellie had drawn 2 nights earlier in crayon. It meant no. That was when the war councils realized the true scope of their mistake. Humanity had been preparing. Not openly. Not with fleets or threats, but with understanding. While the rest of the galaxy obsessed over numbers and tactics, Earth had studied myth, language, resonance. They had listened to the puzzle not as a device, but as a storyteller. And in doing so, they had found something the others never even searched for. The will of the first ones. In deep space, under Europa's crust, the obsidian core activated, a forgotten precursor vault long buried under alien ice. Human researchers had been feeding Ellie's artwork into its harmonics for months. Now the core responded, displaying pathways through subspace that even the Zellari couldn't map. Ellie stood at the center of a massive projection room in Geneva Station, guiding the activation through gestures and soft humming. She didn't command the system. She collaborated with it. It's scared, she said, like it remembers falling apart before. It doesn't want that to happen again. Earth's top scientists didn't fully understand what she meant, but they didn't stop her either. When she sang a lullaby, the obsidian core purred with light. When she whispered, the puzzle responded faster. She wasn't cracking the code. She was the code. The Senate demanded answers. They received silence. The Creel threatened war. Their message never reached Earth. Every relay in their communication chain rerouted into dead ends through systems that hadn't existed until recently. The humans had rewritten parts of the galactic network using puzzle-derived sublogic. Not with brute force, but elegance. The Velar called it an impossibility. The Sithari called it heresy. Earth called it progress. Inside the Luna complex, Project Lighthouse opened its next vault beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. A structure older than language itself rose, displacing miles of seawater in perfect silence. It resembled nothing known. It shimmered in dreamlight. And at its peak was a cradle of resonance, a chamber tuned not for command, but for connection. Ellie stepped inside. All across the planet, every precursor site linked with it, forming a network of shared memory, emotion, and sound. For the first time since the first ones vanished, the system was whole again. A signal went out, not a transmission, but a feeling, broadcast into the void. One phrase pulsed through every artifact. The dreamers have returned. The Velar fleet, still stationed near Earth, tried again, They launched containment rings, setting coordinates just outside Earth's atmosphere, a show of force they believed. A message of control. The rings never reached orbit. They folded into themselves, collapsing into symmetrical loops of matterless energy, and then drifted apart like petals in the wind. No explosions, no countermeasures. Just a quiet refusal of physics itself. On Velar Prime, scientists scrambled to understand the failure. They reviewed the data hundreds of times before giving up. The conclusion was terrifying. The rings didn't fail. Reality refused to obey them. In the Geneva complex, Ellie scribbled a new drawing, a swirl of red and blue and green lines, arcing through an impossible geometry. When asked what it was, she looked up and said, "It's how you turn off gravity for a thought." Ambassador Kepler delivered Earth's official statement to the Senate soon after. "We do not seek war. We do not seek control. We seek understanding. The puzzle of the first ones is not a weapon. It is a library, a teacher, a test of perception. You tried to solve it with formulas. We gave it to a child." The chamber fell into stunned silence. "The first ones didn't vanish," Kepler continued. "They left. And they left the puzzle behind, not as a defense, but as an invitation. You thought it was meant for the strongest. It wasn't. It was meant for the ones who still wonder." The Velar called it propaganda. The Zalari called it madness. But across the stars, new signals began to awaken. On moons thought uninhabited, beneath black oceans, in the veins of ancient asteroids, pieces of the puzzle stirred, and every time they did, the same signature appeared in their opening protocols, a human child's melody. The aliens still believed they could contain it, but Earth wasn't invading. It was growing, and the rest of the galaxy, the ancient, proud, stagnant galaxy, had just realized that they were no longer the architects of the future. They were standing in the middle of humanity's dream, and the dream was only just beginning. Asterisk. The Galactic Senate had never felt so small. Its gray halls, once echoing with the certainty of 1,000 empires, now stood subdued under a shadow they couldn't quantify. Across the galaxy, their war councils bled confidence. Entire networks of power, woven over millions of years, were unraveling. Not through bombs or invasions, but through the quiet awakening of something older, deeper, and far more dangerous. A child's lullaby had replaced war drums, and the puzzle of the first ones continued to unfold. Aboard the flagship Verities Gaze, orbiting Varelian Prime, the Velar High Strategist reviewed the latest intelligence in stunned silence. A dozen worlds, some previously considered barren, were now singing with the same resonance frequencies Earth had activated. Worse still, multiple species had reported dreams they couldn't explain. Dreams that weren't theirs. Dreams that originated from Earth's expanding lighthouse network. No known technology could do that. Humanity wasn't broadcasting. They were connecting. In connection, as the Velar strategist realized too late, was not a side effect. It was the weapon. Back on Earth, Ellie had changed, not in a frightening way. She still laughed, still painted, still climbed trees between sessions with precursor interfaces. But when she spoke now, her words carried weight far beyond her age. Not prophecy, familiarity. She wasn't discovering the secrets. She was remembering them. In a chamber beneath Mount Kilimanjaro, humans had awakened another vault. This one did not contain maps or tools, but people, or echoes of them. Consciousness preserved in quantum echoes, the remnants of the first ones. Last chosen guides. They had failed before, choosing minds too focused on order, too afraid of chaos. The vault had been silent ever since, until Ellie touched it, and it opened to her. The echoes bowed. And one of them whispered, "The dreamer walks again." The vault's core contained schematics, not for weapons, but for something far worse. Truth engines, asterisk. Devices capable of rewriting perception itself. not through illusion, but by altering the context of reality. With them, humans could present a planet as barren to invaders, while allowing its true environment to remain visible only to those. They chose. Earth had already begun building them, the alien empires. Watching this unfold reached a breaking point. The Creel declared a full isolation order, all contact with humans to cease immediately. The Velar demanded the Senate vote to revoke Earth's membership. The Zalari, in desperation, activated their most sacred relic, the Spire of Universal Law, to attempt to classify humanity as a species of containment. But the Spire refused. Its response came in a wave of static across every Senate frequency, followed by a single phrase, spoken in the voice of every senator simultaneously: "You do not govern the dream." And then, in every corner of the galaxy, ships began to fail. Not explode, not shut down, fail to understand the space they were in. Navigational A is reported contradictory coordinates. Weapon systems misfired into nothing. Engines rotated along axes that didn't exist 5 minutes prior. Whole fleets returned home broken, whispering about starfields that moved like waves and moons that watched them like eyes. The truth engines were working, and humanity wasn't using them to attack. They were redefining the battlefield. For every step the ancient races took, humans took 5 sideways. Old strategies fell apart. Logical prediction models collapsed. The Velar High Strategist screamed into her command system, "We are fighting ghosts." But Earth wasn't hiding. They were transforming. Then came the second twist, the one that shattered what remained of the Senate's fragile confidence. First ones had not chosen Earth randomly. Deep beneath the ice crust of Enceladus, a joint human research crew uncovered a structure older than the sun, shaped like a helix of stone and light. At its core was a data core etched in a forgotten language. Human linguists couldn't translate it. Ellie could. "It says," she whispered, "they will come from ash and fire, and when they sing, we will awaken." The data confirmed the impossible. Humanity was not merely the next chosen species. They were the descendants of the last attempt. The first ones had tried before. They had seeded their essence into a young race from a blue world. The collapse came before the plan was complete. But the seed survived. It evolved. It became myth. Then memory. Then curiosity. Then humanity. They weren't just successors. They were the continuation. And the aliens were the spectators. The moment this truth reached the Senate, a dozen races began evacuating colonies, not because they feared destruction, but because they now understood the scale of what they had provoked. Not a war, an awakening. Velar voted to recall all ships. The Creel initiated a rite of containment, hiding their homeworld behind a shield of folded time. The Zalari began rewriting their scriptures, but it was too late. Ellie stood at the heart of the lighthouse, surrounded by sound and light no human language could describe. With each hum, she brought another memory of the first ones into the present. With every sketch, she revealed a future that had been waiting in the shadows of possibility. And across the stars, alien children began dreaming like humans, drawing stars that danced, writing poems about time, seeing possibilities, not patterns. It had begun to spread. Humanity hadn't just awakened ancient power. They had infected the galaxy with wonder. And for the first time, the Senate realized this war wasn't one they could win. Not because of weaponry, not because of fleets, but because the battlefield now lived inside the minds of every dreaming child, and humanity had already won. The stars wept fire over Varelian Prime. A wave of collapsing logic tore through the capital system, not an explosion, not a traditional attack, but a spatial bloom. Ships that had orbited with rigid precision now drifted apart like leaves in a slow-moving river, caught in eddies of warped reality. Artificial minds failed first, unable to reconcile the contradictory data. Organic pilots soon followed, whispering nonsense over comes before falling into stunned silence. Humanity had arrived, but not in warships. The lighthouse array, a fleet of seemingly unarmed vessels, emerged from folds in space that should not have existed, not even hypothetically. Their forms were asymmetrical, almost organic, each ship responding to Ellie's resonance from the lighthouse core on Earth. They were shaped by dreams, not design. Purpose-built for unpredictability. To the alien empires watching, it felt like reality was breaking apart. And in a way, it was. The Senate's fleets fired in desperation, unleashing plasma barrages, temporal disruptors, and dark matter spears. The human vessels did not dodge. They bent, warped, shimmered, vanishing from one angle, appearing from another, sometimes within the enemy's ranks. Every weapon failed, because every attack relied on predictable intention. And humans no longer fought linearly. One by one, Senate warships fell into madness. Not destruction, madness. Fire control systems began targeting their own engines. Sensor arrays reported friendly ships as monsters. Dreadnought captains screamed at invisible threats, their minds unraveling in the presence of incomprehensible movement. And amidst the chaos, Ellie's voice whispered across the system, not through comms, through resonance. She sang a melody, simple and haunting, like a lullaby remembered from another life. Those who heard it, even across light years, felt time slow. A flood of memory washed over the battlefields. Childhood visions, old hopes, forgotten songs. Senators collapsed in their chairs, overwhelmed not by terror, but grief. The kind that comes when you realize everything you feared was your own reflection. Earth hadn't attacked to conquer. They had arrived to remind the galaxy what it used to be. The true battle was already lost, not in space, but in the minds of the Watchers. Entire fleets shut themselves down. Zelari ships powered off voluntarily, their crews meditating to the resonance rather than fighting it. Creel battlesuits crumbled as their pilots refused further deployment. Even the Velar, proud and cold, began jettisoning weapons to avoid provoking the storm. But the storm was not in the sky. It was in them. From orbit, humanity dropped nothing destructive. Instead, the lighthouse broadcast across every channel. A visual, Ellie standing inside the resonance cradle, eyes alight, with a soft pulsing glow. The language she spoke was not English, not Galactic Common. It was something older, woven from tones and images. Even species without vocal cords felt it. The first ones had not died. They had become memory, encoded in the universal constants. Waiting for a species reckless enough to find them, and Earth had found them by dreaming without permission. The greatest empires in the galaxy, all that remained of the old order, watched their last coordinated offensive burn away in confusion. Ships drifted aimlessly, their I-cores singing along with Ellie's song. Reality itself rejected their violence. Then came the final act. The puzzle, long dormant at the heart of the Senate chamber, began to glow. No one touched it. No command was given. The glyphs unfolded in full for the first time in recorded history. It had solved itself. At its center, a crystal shard hovered, spinning slowly, pulsing in rhythm with Earth's signal. When scanned, it returned one translation in every language known to the galaxy. We entrust the dream to those unafraid to weep. The presiding voice of the Senate, the oldest living AI construct in existence, finally spoke aloud after minutes of silence. The war is over, it said. No one objected. Ellie's final broadcast echoed through the galaxy. Not as a command, not as a threat, just a choice. Keep fearing what you don't understand, or dream with us. Back on Earth, in cities that had once feared annihilation, the streets were quiet. The skies above glowed not with missiles, but auroras, light refracted by the newly awakened precursor satellites now floating gently over every continent. Humanity didn't cheer, they felt, they cried, they held hands. They stared into the Sky, knowing their place had changed forever, and all across the galaxy, in empires once devoted to control and hierarchy, children began drawing impossible shapes, singing songs they had never learned, whispering Ellie's name in sleep. The climax wasn't destruction, that it was surrender, not to a foe, but to an idea that could no longer be denied. Humanity had not conquered the stars, they had rewritten what the stars meant, and the galaxy would never be the same again. In the aftermath of the Resonance War, if it could even be called that, the galaxy fell into a strange, reverent silence. There were no treaties, no formal surrenders, no triumphant banners waving above broken capital ships. The battlefield had never truly been a battlefield at all. It had been a mirror, held up to a civilization that had forgotten how to dream. And in that mirror, the empires of the galaxy saw something unbearable. Humanity hadn't overpowered them. They had outgrown them. In the weeks that followed the puzzles. Final activation. The ancient hierarchy of galactic powers fractured without a single shot fired. The Velar's once mighty war council dissolved in shame. The Creel sealed themselves in deep contemplation, their planet entering a centuries-long quiet cycle. The Zalari abandoned their religious doctrines, their temples left to crumble, now replaced by places of quiet study, of sound, color, memory. They called it the awakening. It began slowly. A single child on a moon near Dragotha began humming Ellie's tune while staring into the void. Days later, a young miner on a space station began drawing impossible patterns during his sleep, matching precursor geometries perfectly. A soldier on Rilkar wept after seeing a human music video, then refused to return to his post, stating, simply, "I've been wrong about everything." The resonance had spread, not like a virus. Like hope. The Senate still technically existed, but its tone had shifted. Once a den of arguments and posturing, it now resembled something closer to a school. Humanity, once an observer barely permitted entry, now sat at the center of its great halls, not to rule, but to remind. Ambassador Kepler stood before the assembly during the first convergence session. His once unremarkable face now held the weight of 1,000 eyes, and behind him stood Ellie, the dreamer, not in military regalia or scientific robes, but barefoot, carrying a stuffed lion under one arm. "We didn't come here to win," Kepler said. "That was never the point. We didn't awaken the puzzle to claim its power, we listened. And in doing so, we remembered what you all forgot." The room was still. The first ones didn't vanish. They evolved. They left, knowing their time had ended, but not before they planted the seeds of what might come next. "We are not their replacements. We are their continuation." Ellie stepped forward then. She didn't speak, but lifted her hand. The puzzle, now housed in the chamber, responded immediately. A soft pulse of harmonic light shimmered out, touching every being in the room. They saw memories, but shared, of beings long gone, of worlds that once sang, of the moment the first ones turned their gaze to the stars one last time and whispered, "Let them find their own way." And then Ellie spoke. "I think they knew we'd get lost for a while. But that was okay, because getting lost means you're trying to find something." The chamber stood in absolute silence, broken only by the quiet sob of a Zalari elder. From that day forward, the Senate began restructuring. Not around power, around wonder. A new division formed, the Dreaming Accord, an alliance of species not to govern, but to explore the now reactivated resonance, pathways left behind by the first ones. Humans led some of these expeditions, but just as often, they let others go ahead. They had no interest in being kings, only in being curious. Back on Earth, Ellie returned to her home outside Geneva. She no longer interfaced with the resonance grid daily. She played in her garden, she painted. Sometimes the dreams still came, pieces of what might be, fragments of ancient starlight. But they no longer overwhelmed her. When asked what she Wanted to be when she grew up, she shrugged. Maybe a teacher. Or a baker, or maybe just someone who listens. The lighthouse array remained active, not as a weapon, but as a signal, not to enemies, but to the unfound. Those still drifting among the stars, unaware that the song had begun again, because that's what it truly was now, not a war, not a conquest, but a song. A melody written across the stars by beings who had once been gods, and now lingered only in the dreams of a child. And across the galaxy, new songs began to rise, different languages, different tones, but all of them connected by the same thread: imagination, the greatest force the universe had ever known. Ellie stood in her backyard one evening, looking up at the sky. Her father stood beside her, quiet. "Do you think it's over?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's never over, but I think it's beginning." And as the stars danced above them, they did not shimmer with threat or fear or cold logic. They shimmered with invitation to dream, to wonder, to become. Humanity was no longer just part of the galaxy. They were its pulse,